But this topic is something that I believe is something that everybody needs to pay attention to, but more so, athletes can grab a hold of this lesson as I speak to small businesses and brands who want to work with athletes and understanding why athletes are a great partnership. But for athletes to tune in to understand why they need to do certain things to get into the lane or into the radar of a small business, right? So let's kick it all off, right? So why are athletes more than just endorsers when it comes to the NIL? Right, the NIL is such a big buzzword over the last few years, where athletes are being told, "Or you now can be paid. You can be paid for your name, your image, and your likeness. You can build you a brand. You can make money while in school." But what has been happening is a lot of athletes have only been paid because they're going to endorse a product. And then some companies don't know how to actually work with an athlete to endorse their product or how to build their brand through an athlete. So through this series, we're going to talk about ways that athletes can become more than just endorsers, but powerful brand advocates, right? So the influence of an athlete, right? Everybody knows that athletes are, well liked, they're well known. Everybody wants to be the next. You could put whatever athlete name in there. They want to be the next whoever, right? So for a brand, you have to understand that athletes bring a unique and a authentic voice, right? When you're trying to get your brand message out there through an athlete, you have to know that an athlete has a different way of speaking, a different way of endorsing products, right? And their influence extends well beyond sports. You have some people who've never watched a game, who saw an athlete on a commercial, or they saw an athlete in a movie or a TV show or commentary, and they found them to be likable. So athletes have such a diverse group of fans. And if we're speaking to the brands, this is how you can tap those athletes who you see fit your brand, fit your message. As an athlete, you should be looking at yourself as, how do I resonate, or how do I relate to more people than just those who love my running and jumping ability, right? And that is all about brand alignment, right? So I always tell companies whenever we pitch them on working with our athletes is, what's your brand and which athletes do you feel align with that brand? And then you'll see that a lot of companies don't really know what their brand message is, what their brand mission or their brand vision is. So they go out and they just want to attach themselves to the most popular athlete, or to the athlete who everybody deems as the cool one. But sometimes you can have a misalignment in your brand messaging and plug on the wrong athlete. So as a small business owner, when you're looking to work with an athlete, when you're looking to have an athlete endorse your product or endorse your company, first off, what is your brand, right? Who are you trying to target, right? Who are the people you're trying to get this message across, and which athlete actually fits that? It doesn't always have to be the starter. It doesn't always have to be the star athlete. Sometimes it can be the third string. Sometimes it can be the guy who in the college space, because that's what NIL is focused on, is sometimes it can be the walk-on, right? It can be the guy who isn't getting starter reps. It can be the athlete who's just a role player, right? So even as an athlete, you have to know that the NIL is not solely focused on the star athletes. Like, it's all about brand alignment. Who are you as a person? Who are you as a brand? And can the two coexist when it comes to marketing and sales and generating leads, right? So when we talk about the impact of working with an athlete, there's a vision that you should look at them in a long-term manner, right? Because guys like Charles Barkley, Deion Sanders, you name it, Chris Carter, those guys are still relevant today, but they're relevant in a different space, because they took their NIL, they took their name, image, and likeness and built it into something else where companies are starting to see them in a light that's longer lasting, right? So as an athlete, if you're thinking long term and partnering with a company or partnering with a brand, you have to think about who do you want to be in 10 years, because companies are building their brands on a 3, 5, 10-year roadmap. So as a company and as an athlete, do you see yourself working with each other in 5 years and 10 years, right? And as a company working with an athlete, is this somebody or someone that you want to attach your brand to in your early years or in your revamp years? Because your association with this one athlete may not benefit you 3 years from today. So when it comes to the NIL space, it's always about brand alignment, right? Seeing athletes as more than just the stats and the right now of them being superstars on their team, because your brand will be here longer than where they play at. And that's one thing that we teach our athletes too, is your brand should outlast your playing, right? Your NIL will be known long after you're finished playing. There are some athletes who you can walk across right now who you might not even know that they once played ball. But because of where you meet them at, and then you find out about what they did in the past, it's almost like, wow, you've had two lives, right? So your brand and your name and your NIL should be going further and further well after you play, right? Now, in the long-term relationship, right, you want to look at working with an athlete as building something that's authentic. I think a lot of times we go after the big name guys and then we just give them money, and we don't think about what the real relationship could be, what this athlete might become in 5 years, right? So when you're working with an athlete, there has to be a mutual benefit, right? You want something, they want something. And 9 times out of 10, it's not always money, right? Money is always like the determining factor of how much do I want to give this athlete or how much do I want to make from this deal. But if we're talking about a mutual benefit, most athletes will finish playing their sport within 3 or 4 years at their highest level. So in 3 or 4 years, if an athlete can transition into working with your company, working for your company, being an investor in your company, or being a ambassador well after they're playing, I think that lasts longer than this one-off of saying, hey, I'm gonna just give them money, and the athlete saying, well, I'm gonna just take money, right? Because a mutual benefit always is about collaboration, right? What can you do for the athlete? What can they do for you? And then how can you combine those things and build it for something that's going to last a long time, right? The collaboration in today's age can be a social media content, right? Or they can help you build your community out, or even they can help you build a product. There are companies out there and there are businesses out there who are doing research and development utilizing athletes, right? Because who better than to work with somebody who is, one, a top tier physical specimen, but also living a regular normal life, right? So your product, whether it's home goods, food, nutrition, technology, health, medical, devices, whatever it is, working with an athlete on research and development is probably a cheat code to working with the general pop, because they kind of teeter-totter in two worlds, right? And when that is happening, you're building engagement where people can relate your product to an athlete, right? They can relate your product to a sport, right? And I believe that's why companies like the Nikes and the Adidas and all those people of the world are lasting so long, because they continuously attach themselves to athletes and to sports. So if you take that blueprint and say, okay, well, how can my product collaborate with an athlete? And as an athlete, if I'm saying, okay, if I want to last longer than my playing career, what type of companies or industries am I really interested in? And who and which brand can I associate myself with, right? The story of Michael Jordan, right? Michael Jordan had the opportunity to work with Converse, and I believe it was Adidas, and then he had Nike. So Nike was a little new on the block, but Nike was different. Nike offered something that was more in a line with where Jordan and his family saw him going, and it just made more sense, not just financially, but brand wise. And you see it's paying off now, right? He had multiple years that he played and he won, but 20 plus years after that, he's still selling product through a company that he aligned himself with. So as an athlete, as a brand, who can you see yourself attaching yourself to that lasts longer than your knees, right? Your shoulders and stuff like that. And when we think about the Jordans of the worlds and the Usain Bolts and the Michael Phelps of the world, right? These companies are partnering with these athletes, and these athletes are no longer performing the sport that they're performing, but they're getting something that's called an ROI, a return on investment, right? These athletes are still prominent. They're still relevant. People have known them through their sport and through their endeavors outside of the sport. So what type of ROI are you looking for first, right? Because not all ROIs are based around money. Some of them are around brand awareness and engagement and product development and things like that. So when we're looking at what is the return on investment of working with an athlete through NIL, it can't solely be about dollars, but it also just can't be brand awareness either. Or maybe your company wants an opportunity to partner with an athlete while they're on the come up, where the return of investment grows as their popularity grows, right? And that's when you get into the certain different deals of equity and ownership and chapters and charters, right? So Magic Johnson, he got into Starbucks. Starbucks was a corporate chain. They were not offering any franchises or anything like that, but they also weren't producing stores in certain economic areas. Well, Magic Johnson felt he had a ear to the streets, and he knew that he was able to plant certain Starbucks in certain areas. So he requested that he not only get a franchise, but he also get equity and things of that nature. So now he's one of the largest franchisees of Starbucks. Former athlete, billionaire on net worth, but he's partnering with companies and offering them a return on investment that they probably wouldn't have gotten because they weren't looking in those areas. So as a small business, as a brand, as a company who is looking to get in the NIL space, not always about the big name athletes, because Magic Johnson wasn't relevant in the Starbucks era, but his business acumen and his network and his responsibilities and his personality led him to broker and negotiate a really great deal, which allowed Starbucks to grow in areas and introduce their product to a demographic that probably would not have thought about coffee, right? So as a brand, as an athlete, don't look at anything you're doing as mediocre or minute, because at the end of the day, if you're really trying to leverage athletes in your marketing, in your branding, in your campaigns, it starts with brand alignment. It starts with what's your brand messaging. It's what athletes actually fit what you're trying to get across. It isn't always the prominent athlete. It isn't always the star athlete. Sometimes it might be the athlete who's riding the bench, right? That personality and that market and demographic of where that athlete comes from might be exactly what you need to take it off. And as an athlete, just because you are riding the bench or you third string, it doesn't mean you're less worthy of getting the NIL. It just means you have to start showcasing who you are as a person more outwardly, so that when brands are looking for partners and ambassadors and things of that nature, you pop up on a screen. So to wrap all this up, athlete marketing goes further than just, oh, this athlete is dope. He scored some points, scored some touchdowns, and I want to work with him. It's what's my brand message? What's the target audience? Who I want to work with? What are some things I value? And does this athlete match with that? In all reality, when it comes to the NIL, when it comes to athletes developing themselves as a brand, as a company, as a small business, you're more than just what you do on the field. And what you do off the field needs to be showcased in an authentic way, because that collaboration with a small business will carry you further than you making a team or you doing a tryout. So in all of that, I hope you guys really take note of this point, that working with an athlete or being an athlete looking for working with a company, you have more leverage by being authentic and aligning yourself with the brand that makes sense. And brands, you have a hell of a shot by aligning your brand with an athlete who has the fan base, the target market, and the audience that you're looking for. This has been a great opportunity to share this resource with you guys. I look forward to talking to you guys in part 2 of this.